The Forgotten Garden. Elena stood at the edge of the overgrown garden, the soft whisper of the wind tangling her auburn hair. She hadn't been back to this place in 10 years, yet it felt the same, timeless, suspended, holding the echoes of a love she thought she had buried. The garden belonged to her grandmother, a patch of heaven tucked into the edge of a sleepy village. It was wild now, with ivy climbing the stone walls and blooms of every color spilling out of their borders. But 10 years ago, it had been magic, a place where she had found love. It had started with a book. Elena was 18 then, caught between dreams and the pressure of real life. Her mother wanted her to pursue medicine, but Elena dreamed of writing stories, weaving words into art. She would sneak into the garden with her leather journal, writing under the wisteria trellis. That summer, while lost in the pages of a romance novel, a boy's voice startled her. "Are you always this oblivious when someone's standing right in front of you?" She had looked up, annoyed, only to meet the deep green eyes of a stranger. He was tall, lean, with dark, messy hair that fell over his forehead. He wore a mischievous smile, holding a tattered book in his hand. "I've been here for 10 minutes," he continued, amused. "You didn't even notice." Elena closed her book and raised an eyebrow. "You're trespassing. This is private property." So is the world, technically. Yet, here we are. That was how she met Adrian, the boy who would turn her summer into a whirlwind. Adrian wasn't from the village. He was visiting his aunt after his parents' divorce. He seemed like someone who didn't belong anywhere, carrying a restlessness that matched her own. They began meeting in the garden almost every day, exchanging books, stories, and secrets. Adrian believed in her writing, even when she didn't. "You're good, Elena," he told her once after reading a poem she scribbled. "You don't just write words, you write feelings. That's rare." His faith in her felt intoxicating. They began to share their dreams, their fears. Adrian spoke of his parents' constant fighting, how he felt like a burden tossed between them. Elena spoke of her mother's disapproval, her fear of never being enough. One evening, under a violet sky, Adrian leaned closer. "Do you know what I think?" "What?" she whispered, her heart pounding. "You're afraid to live your story. You're too busy living someone else's." The word struck her like lightning. Before she could reply, he gently took her hand. "Don't be afraid, Elena." That summer, they kissed for the first time under the wisteria, the taste of sweet honeysuckle lingering in the air. For the first time, she felt seen, understood, and completely free. But summers are fleeting, and so was their time. Adrian had to leave. His father had arranged for him to study abroad in London. They promised to write, but promises made under starry skies often crumble under distance. The letters stopped after a year. Life moved on. Elena buried herself in her studies, eventually following her mother's wishes to pursue a career in medicine. The garden became a memory, a place she deliberately avoided because it held too much of him. But fate is strange. 10 years later, her grandmother's passing brought her back, and standing there, the memories rushed back like a flood. She could still hear his laughter, feel the warmth of his touch, but he was gone. Adrian was probably married by now, living a life she'd never know. "Elena?" Her heart froze at the sound of her name. She turned, slowly, her breath catching. It was him. Adrian stood at the garden's edge, older, more rugged, but unmistakably him. His green eyes still held that same spark, though there was a weariness now, a heaviness that hadn't been there before. "You're here," he said softly, his voice tinged with disbelief. What are you doing here?" she managed to ask, her voice trembling. "I heard about your grandmother," he said, stepping closer. "I'm sorry for your loss. I wanted to pay my respects." Elena blinked, trying to process his words. "You came back?" "I never really left," Adrian admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "Not in my heart." Her chest tightened. "You stopped writing. You disappeared." "I know." His face crumpled with regret. "I didn't mean to. Life got messy. My father, he needed me. I thought I was doing the right thing, but it meant losing you." The pain of his absence surged back, raw and aching. "Do you know how hard it was, waiting for letters that never came?" "I'm sorry, Elena," he said, his voice breaking. "I was young and scared, but I never stopped thinking about you. About us." Tears filled her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "It's too late, Adrian. It's been 10 years. "Is it?" he asked, stepping closer. "Because you're still here, and I'm still here, And this place, it still feels like ours. She wanted to push him away, to guard the pieces of her heart she had spent years gluing back together. But standing there under the wisteria, it was impossible to deny the pull between them. I don't know if I can do this again, she whispered. I don't know if I can survive losing you again. Adrian reached out, gently brushing a tear from her cheek. You won't lose me this time. I'm not going anywhere. His touch was a balm to her soul, a reminder of everything they had shared. And for the first time in years, she allowed herself to hope. They sat in the garden for hours, talking, laughing, filling in the gaps of the years they had lost. Adrian spoke of his struggles, his regrets. Elena spoke of her career, her doubts. They weren't the same people they had been, but in some ways they were more. By the time the sun set, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson, they had found their way back to each other. The garden, once forgotten, bloomed again with life, just as their love did. Some stories aren't meant to end. They're meant to be paused, waiting for the right time to begin again. For Elena and Adrian, that time was now.